Part 3, Chapter 1. The army assembles around Fontainebleau. News from Paris. Success of the Royalist Party. From March 31st to April 5th. On the 31st of March at 6 in the morning, Napoleon entered Fontainebleau. He merely took up a military position at the castle. The large rooms were shut up, and he repaired to his little apartment, which was situated on the first story, parallel with the gallery of Francis I. In the course of that evening and the following morning, the heads of the columns, which Napoleon had brought from Champagne, came up by the road of Sens, and the advance guard of the troops from Paris arrived by the road of Essonne. These wrecks of our army now assembled around Fontainebleau. The Duke de Conegliano, who commanded the National Guard of Paris, the Duke of Danzig, who, in spite of his advanced age, had performed the campaign, the Prince of the Muscova, the Duke de Taranto, the Duke de Reggio, and the Prince of Neuchâtel from Troyes, and the Dukes de Treviso and Ragusa from Paris successively arrived at the imperial headquarters. The Duke de Bassano was the only minister at present with Napoleon. The Duke de Vicenza was on a mission to the Allies, and the other ministers were on the Loire with the Empress. As the troops defiled, they received orders to take their positions behind the river Essonne. The Duke de Ragusa fixed his headquarters at Essonne, and the Duke de Treviso established his at Monacy. The troops which arrived from Paris rallied in the rear of this line. Those which came from Champagne took up an intermediate position in the direction of Fontainebleau. The baggage and the grand park of artillery were ordered to Orleans. Napoleon, therefore, still had an army at his disposal. While he was calculating the resources of his military position, the attention of the individuals about him was wholly absorbed with what was passing in Paris. The least details from the capital were eagerly sought after, and the mission of the Duke de Vicenza was the grand subject of interest. On the night of the 30th, the Duke had presented himself at the advanced post of the Allies. He had been introduced to the Emperor Alexander and had experienced an honorable reception, but Alexander held in his hand the keys of Paris, which had just been presented to him. He was busily engaged in issuing orders for his entrance into the capital, which was to take place at 10 on the following morning. He wished to find himself secure in Paris before he spoke of business, and all that the Duke de Vicenza could obtain was the promise of an audience at the first leisure moment after the military occupation of the capital. Meanwhile, the chiefs of the enemy's army had begun to declare themselves against the government of Napoleon. The Austrian general-in-chief, who in the absence of his sovereign should have been the more circumspect at such an important crisis, was on the contrary one of the first to avow his hostile sentiments, and this he did with a degree of eagerness altogether unaccountable. Speaking in the name of Europe in arms for the walls of Paris, Schwarzenberg proclaimed that the Allied sovereigns sincerely sought a salutary authority in France with which they might treat for the union of all nations and all governments. And already disavowing the rights and authority of Napoleon, he recommended to the Parisians not only the example of Lyon, which had just surrendered, but also that of Bordeaux, which had acknowledged the Bourbons. At this signal, the agents of the House of Bourbon in Paris feared not to show themselves. They had been given to understand that all was to depend on the way in which the capital should declare itself. The importance of the moment occasioned them to double their efforts. A general stupor pervaded the public mind. There was neither government nor police. The field was open to the first occupant who might present himself, and the royalists had only to seize the reins of authority. On the 31st at noon, the Emperor Alexander and the King of Prussia made their entrance into the capital. This movement at first excited no sensation, but at length cries in favor of the Bourbons were raised, and white cockades were mounted. The astonished Parisians inquired why the Emperor of Austria did not appear, and they learned with uneasiness that he was still far distant. The Emperor Alexander alighted at the house of Monsieur de Talleyrand. The minister had been instructed to follow the Empress to the Loire, but he had halted at the barrier and returned to Paris to pay his respects to the Allies. No sooner had the Tsar established himself in Paris than he held a council to deliberate on the political course which it would be advisable for the Allies to adopt. Monsieur de Talleyrand and his confidential friends failed not to attend the council. In vain did the Duc de Vicenza endeavor to obtain the promised audience. The cause of his sovereign was lost even before he could procure a hearing.